This is an introduction to myfloodalert. First we begin by entering the URL for myfloodalert, which is myfloodalert.com, and up pops our welcome. This is the home screen, and we can sign in on this screen. We can go to flood maps, we can go to links, find out more about myfloodalert, and get help. Let's go to flood maps. myfloodalert lets us to search by zip code to identify areas of interest, or we can choose a state of interest, such as West Virginia or Ohio, like we show here. If we were to choose a state like West Virginia, then we can select a water body such as the Greenbrier River or the Kanawha River or the Ohio River. And if we were to select, say, the Kanawha River, then we could select a gauge. Here we have 3 gauges listed for Charleston because we have 3 scenarios to show you today. Using the zip code, we can put in the zip code 25301, and it will show us the 3 gauges that are closest to that zip code. We can also zoom in on our map and point to the locations that we're interested in. And you'll see that up here at Killbuck Creek in Ohio, the color of the placeholder or place marker is orange. That's because it's in an alert state using dummy data in this instance. But it's an illustration of how the flood gauging stations change color depending on their National Weather Service status. So let's now look at the Ohio River at Wheeling, West Virginia. So myfloodalert is telling us that at the moment the Ohio River at Wheeling is within its banks. There's not much exciting to show right now, so we have this placeholder screen. On the upper left, you can see that we have history and forecast. So there's a slider bar here, and if we slide through history, it looks back at data that's in the recent past. And if we look at forecast, you can see now that we're in June now, June 2nd at 6 p.m., June 3rd at 12 a.m., and so forth. And here it's giving us the reading of what we're seeing in terms of stage. So I'll go back to my pointer, and we can slide this back and forth, and you can see that the gauge stage changes. None of these are levels of danger or concern, and so the color here in gauge feet is not changing. But were we to enter something in the 30s, then this color would change to yellow. There would also be a warning banner here that would report in a streaming form the alert for Wheeling and any other city that might be having an issue for this state. This also identifies the conditions at the location using the National Weather Service vernacular. The lower slider bar is for the prototype or for demonstration or doing what-ifs of what the flood situation would be were there a gauge reading of, say, 44. So let's zoom in here on an area of Wheeling, and we'll even change it to a satellite view so we can get a better idea of what this might look like. And so at gauge 36, you can see that there's a little bit of water around the racetrack. If we go to gauge 38, much more of the facility is flooded, including some of the parking lot. And at 40, we have an extensive area of flooding here on the southern tip of Wheeling Island. And you might say, well, how often does that happen? Well, we can find that out by looking down at the gauge and return intervals area of myfloodalert. And we can see that when the gauge is at 41 feet, we have we're having an event that's about a 1 in 10 annual chance of occurrence, or said another way, 10-year return interval. The next interval we could look at would be 48 feet. So we can click on 48 here, and this would be something we'd expect to see with a 2% chance in any year or a 1 in 50 chance. And you can see that the entire island on Wheeling, in the city of Wheeling, is flooded. You can also look at other areas such as this industrialized area here and move our slider back and forth to see what the impacts would be at different gauge stages. And these, of course, would work with the forecast tool as well if there was a forecast for readings in the 40s, like we're seeing with this gauge. So if the forecast said 42, it would look like this. If the forecast were slid over and then went to 44, then it would look like this. We'd have a better idea of when flooding would occur, and also the time, using the forecast slider and the time shown here. You can also examine the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area, which is the area designated by FEMA as having a 1 in 100 potential of occurrence. And so you can see that here the 1 in 100 is about the same as 50. It's shown as 51 in our return interval table. So let's take a look here at 51 or 50 and see how they match. And they match very closely. You can see that 52 is a little bit bigger and 50 is a little bit smaller than the gauge area for 51. Now if we back out, we see something sort of interesting here. On the West Bank, we can see that the Special Flood Hazard Area doesn't project into this area. It's purple, it's not gray, but the purple does show here. Well, why is that? And it's because this is Ohio, and the Special Flood Hazard Area mapping that we have is just for West Virginia at this time in this model. So let's look at another community. Let's look at Charleston, and we have several ways of looking at Charleston. We'll choose the W2 version, and you can see that we're starting up the same way with Canal River at Charleston within its banks. And as we move the slider along, our colors change. We have more yellow in this instance, which is flood advisory. And as our gauge heights increase, the areas of inundation increase. So let's look at this area over here in West Charleston. You can see that at a reading of 31, we have flooding in several city blocks here. We can turn on our satellite view and see exactly where they are by street, by reference to particular landmarks in town, and we can also then look to see, okay, now what is the 100-year flood, and it's a 38. So here's our 38, and let's click on Special Flood Hazard Area to see how well we match. And you can see that the match is halfway decent. Now for Charleston, a 500-year flood is a very significant event, a one chance in 500 or a 0.2% annual chance of occurrence. And basically it goes from valley to valley for the Canal Valley, which is very similar to our 48. Let's look at 48 here and see how it shows as well. So we've demonstrated how myfloodalert works in showing where flooding could occur and when it could occur. Another feature is the logging of gauge observations. So Charleston presents its data every day for the Southside Bridge. And so these are the readings that come once a day. Those readings are more frequent for this particular gauge if a storm event is expected or flooding is expected. Here are our forecast data, and they're the source that appear when we're running the model up here. So that's where the data come from. myfloodalert is grabbing this data and archiving it from a source of the National Weather Service in Charleston. This is the hot link to the National Weather Service's gauge site for the Southside Bridge at Charleston, so we can see in graphical form what's going on, see what the gauge is, confirm our historical records. This is the color code system that we're using: action, flood, moderate, and major flood stage. And we take these numbers from the graph, from the presentation, from the website, and use those in myfloodalert. So that's where these gauge settings come from. Let's look now at some links. So there's a West Virginia Flood Determination Tool, which is at West Virginia University. So this allows us to zoom in and look at areas within the state and see what the special flood hazards area are for the state. So here's Charleston, and we can get a lot of FEMA kind of data from this. We go back now. The West Virginia Floodplain Management Association is our home agency or association for floodplain management. It's a nonprofit incorporated group. The Association of State Floodplain Managers is a national group that's excellent in its materials and resources and advocacy for floodplain management. The West Virginia Gauging Council, that's what we're meeting with here today. And finally, the website for my business. And that's myfloodalert.